Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Mother's Day. I'm just going to go see what it looks like on Facebook. Happy Mother's Day, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar, Mommy Dearest, where we are going to talk about how to heal past hurts, especially hurts that we experience in our primary relationships. Thank you for joining, Cynthia and Wendy. So glad that you're here. Especially hurts that we've experienced in our parental primary relationship with our moms, because today's Mother's Day. Yeah, do that, Craig. Yeah. So I'm going to introduce our panelist that is with us this evening, that I'm really excited that have agreed to come and to be with us. And I'm just going to do a brief introduction, and as we, hey Irene, thank you for being here. And as we talk, then they're going to tell us some more about themselves. So first we have Nina, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist. And we have Audra, who is a speaker and a bestseller. She's an author and a bestseller. And we have Craig, who is a musician and a videographer. And we just different perspective on parenting, on the relationship between mother and child. And it's Mother's Day today in the UK, and I know not everybody can celebrate. But Wounds to Scars is about helping you to heal. You still have no audio. Keep working at it, Craig, and we'll be here. Wounds to Scars is about helping you to heal the wounds that you've suffered in childhood, help you to heal childhood challenges so that you can function better in your relationships, in your romantic relationships, your interpersonal relationships, and your parental responses. If you were on the conference last week, we had an amazing time on the conference with different people that were specifically looking at the legacy of trauma especially that we experience in childhood. And this is one of the legacies. And because it's Mother's Day, I thought it was an opportune time to have this discussion. And I've invited these amazing speakers who have offered their time to come and share with us. So I'm going to just start out and talk about why am I doing this? I've kind of said some of why am I doing this before, but why is it necessary to talk about lack of connection between us and our mom, and what does that have anything to do with life, and how does that impact me throughout my life? I wrote a blog post, I think it was about 2 years ago, and it's called Purple is for Princesses, and that is what my daughter likes to say, because she loves purple. Anything purple is for princesses, she say. And I wrote that because it was just such a significant time for both of us. We had disrupted attachment because she was ill and had to stay in hospital. And this is a subject that nobody talks about, and nobody tells you that when you go home after hospital that you might have to work at some things. You know, I wanted to do more than stay alive for my children. I wanted to do more than provide a home and food and clothes and all of that stuff. I wanted to do emotional connection. What I didn't know was that disrupted attachment could impact emotional connection, because we don't talk about that. And so fast forward, I think it was 9 years later, when we went shopping for some stuff that she needed, that, you know, I'd planned to cry when that kind of time came. I didn't cry, but it was such a significant time because it also showed me the growth that we'd had and the 7 years of hard work and tears, and that it was paying off. And so this subject is really, really close to me, my heart, and I know it's close to some of your hearts. I know not everybody can say Happy Mother's Day. I know sometimes we do the obligatory post, but what if you could work through lack of connection with your mom? What if you could do something that was going to ensure that your children would benefit from a different kind of relationship with you, and you would pass on a different kind of legacy? What if you could heal the wounds of the past and function in a safe, secure relationship with other people? And even what if you could heal enough so that you could forgive? What if you're a mother listening to this, knowing that I didn't do that. I didn't connect emotionally. I stayed alive for them, but I didn't have what it took to connect emotionally because I had my own trauma and I just wasn't emotionally available. if that's you, then there is hope. And I'm hoping that today we can have some of that. So I'm going to start with Audra. Do you want us to tell us a little bit about yourself just before we go into the questions that we have?
Sure. Hey guys, good morning if you're in the US and good afternoon if you're in the UK. I am Audra R. Upchurch, and I am a best-selling author of Unchain Me Mama, which was released almost a year ago. And it was truly driven from my own disconnection with my mother. And unfortunately, I kind of passed that on with my own daughter. So this book was kind of twofold. Me rectifying my difficult relationship with my own mother, and me recognizing that I had to own my own choices in regard to my daughter so she could heal as well.
That's powerful. So we'll talk some more about that. You had to own your own choices. So you took responsibility. You took responsibility of you as opposed to staying blame. And can you tell us a little bit about you, Nina, please?
Yeah, my name is Nina Keeler, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Good morning to some and good afternoon to others. Happy Mother's Day. I am basically a therapist here in the U.S. that works solely with childhood trauma and working with survivors of childhood trauma. And that's my passion. I think that's my passion because it was my own personal experience of working through my own trauma. My mom died when I was 6 years old, and so that was an attachment disruption for us. And I had to learn to live with that and learn to grieve that and learn to continue to live. And I started doing my own personal journey when I had my son and starting to work through some of my own attachment disruptions. And then when prior to having my son, when I got married, some things came up. And then when I had my son, some more things came up. And so I learned that it wasn't just this one thing that I had to deal with, but it was this thing that I continually deal with and continually grow from and develop and learn how it's kind of like an onion, and each layer is a different layer that I have to work with and deal with as my life continues to grow and develop, as I continue to work through things. So I've learned, I have a passion for it deep down on the inside, and I've learned how to manage my own stuff and helping others to manage their stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nina and Audra. And we will introduce Craig when he is able to come back on. When you're doing live, sometimes, technology will get in the way. It disrupts us for a little bit. But we're going to keep going. Nina, I really like what you said, that you recognize that attachment was disrupted for you at that early age when your mom died, and you realized that you had to do something about it when you had children, when you were married, and it plays out in different kinds of relationships, doesn't it? The lack of connection. So I wanted to ask you, if somebody who has experienced disrupted attachment like that in their early life, they've never experienced secure attachment with their mothers or with any primary caregiver who was female, what are the things that they can do to begin to heal?
I think the biggest thing is learning to connect with that little part of them. I like to work with parts, and I use that terminology not in a way of, we see movies and the media portrays parts as something that's very scary. And it's not thinking about it in that way, but thinking about this little part of me. I'll use myself as an example. This little part of me needed support and needed nurturance and needed to know that life was going to be okay. And so I started to develop a relationship with that part of me. Like when I would get anxious or I would get nervous or something would come up and I would feel very scared, I started to recognize that part of me that was coming up and saying, oh, that's my little girl part. What can I do to support that little part? And then not only did I develop a relationship with that part, but I allowed other people to develop a relationship with that part. And so I started to develop relationships. And so I encourage my clients to develop relationships with people in their life who are able to nurture that part of them and to give them what they didn't get. And so going back and doing work with that part of yourself and allowing that part of yourself. A lot of times we'll shame that part of ourselves. Yeah. And make that part of ourselves feel like it's not acceptable. But I really encourage people to go back and really work to accept that part and then be able to move forward from there.
Thank you. I see you're nodding, Audra. Can you relate to some of that?
Oh, definitely. My mom suffered with mental illness, and that connection was broken in pivotal years for me, those teenage years when young women need their mothers. So yeah, I definitely can connect when it's disrupted, how it just affects everything else in your life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you said, Nina, there we do shame. We shame that part of us. Is it the part of us that have a need for a hug? The part of us that wants to cry? The part of us that is still yearning, but we feel we shouldn't be as an adult? Is it that part of us that you in, so for example, in your work, is it that part that people usually shame?
Yes, that's the part. And it's usually shame out of fear. Usually the underlying emotion is fear. Like, I don't want to put myself out there and be disappointed, or I don't want to ask for something and someone not be able to give it to me. So I'll just say, I don't need that. I'm fine. I'm sure I can deal with this. And so that is kind of the shaming of that part. And it's like, you shouldn't want that. You're okay. You don't need that. But really, in grand scheme, we do need that. We do need to be able to be loved and taken care of and nurtured in that way.
So I hear acceptance. If I accept that that part of me is okay and that I need it, then it could start me on that path to healing, couldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you begin to give yourself, I mean, just the science of it is that the brain develops from the bottom to the top. And so when we go back and meet some of the needs in our neural development, that in our emotional development that we didn't get met when we were a child, then we're able to do some of the higher level stuff. And so that idea of going back and nurturing some of that parts of us allows us to be able to then engage in a different way in our present day.
Mm-hmm. Would that be the same process that somebody who was not emotionally connected? So mom was there, but there was disrupted attachment in the sense that mom had her own trauma that prevented her from connecting with me. What would that be the same process somebody who didn't have an emotional connection make? The same process of acknowledging, of not being afraid, not being shamed, to know that I need this connection and I don't have it.
Absolutely. I think it's the same. I think physical and emotional. I think both of those are very similar, because you can be physically there and not emotionally there, or you can be physically there and not emotionally there. And so some of the same things I think happen when you are not having someone emotionally or physically there, or by one of the other. And so I think they're the same. I think they're the same process.
Yeah.
Any difference? I definitely think you're going to be working through some of the same things.
Just an acceptance and an acknowledgement. I've had women who have experienced, for example, living domestic abusive situations, who said to me, I was not emotionally available to my children while they were younger, because I couldn't. And I understand that. I totally understand that, because you're so focused on staying alive, on pleasing the abuser and making the relationship work, that you cannot be emotionally available. So if you're that woman listening and you know that your relationship with your children now is disrupted or there's no relationship and you want one and you can't have one, there's hope for you too, that you can begin to heal, so that you can. Is there a cutoff age where a mother can begin to heal the relationship between her and her child? Would you guys say there's a cutoff age?
Absolutely not. I don't think so. I think the work is forever being done. I like to tell my clients, I work with clients from, I work across the lifespan. So I work with little people as well as older people. And I like to say, as a parent, we set the glass ceiling for our children, and our hopes is that they will jump off of that and go higher. And so the more work we do, the more we take care of ourselves, the more we learn to live a healthy and balanced life, the more they're going to be able to do that. So there's never, I think, an age where you should say, oh, it's too late.
That's hope, because sometimes people wonder, is it too late? And Audra, you mentioned writing your book and as a process. So you agree that there's no cutoff age, not after they're teenager or after they're 7, it's an ongoing work.
Oh, definitely. My daughter and our relationship, I used to say, was tedious from birth, because I didn't know how to connect. I explained that my mother had mental illness. By the age of 14, I was homeless. By the age of 17, I was a single mom. And I had my first child, who I lost custody of because I had no family support. Mm-hmm. So by the time Melissa came around, emotionally, I was so disconnected.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until, I would say, maybe a year or two that we really started to develop a relationship. And, she'll be 29 this year. And I'm thankful now we talk almost every day. We can have really candid, honest conversations with each other. But it took a long time getting here. But I thankfully know it's never too late.
No.
And that's a message I hope anyone that's watching that has a disconnected relationship with their child or with their mother, I really want them to understand it is, as long as you live and breathe, it is never too late. There are just choices each of you have to make in order for it to work and for you guys to move forward.
Yeah. Thank you for that message. I think it's so important because one of the things I do in my courses, in the Journey from Broken especially, is the generational thing that we do. And it's so amazing how things just gets passed on. So amazing how I can mirror the relationship I have with my mom, with my daughter.
Yes.
And not consciously aware of it. Sorry, Audra. Were you?
No, I agree 100%. We think we're different than our mothers, right?
Yeah.
we want to think that we are, but when we talk to our kids, we find out otherwise.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really about owning those choices, owning it and acknowledging it. I had a conference last year and the social media correspondent interviewed my daughter. And later on, when I watched the video, it just really moved me because my daughter said, when my mother said yes to me, it allowed me to say yes to myself. And in me saying yes to her, I had to acknowledge my part in some of her decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had to acknowledge that I didn't give this woman all that she needed, that I didn't show up for her the way I should have. I had to own that. I think a lot of times we'll say, well, I did the best I could. But we don't realize when we say that to our children, we're negating their experiences. So I couldn't try to fluff over my poor choices to say, well, honey, my mama didn't do this for me and her mama didn't do that for her. I just had to own it and apologize. And in doing that, that allowed my daughter to embrace her own freedom.
And I, as you said, I had to own it. I breathed deep because I felt that is such a taking responsibility. I had to take responsibility of what I didn't do, regardless of what I never got.
Exactly.
I had to take responsibility for that so that I could help my daughter make positive choices. Wow.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's hard. Parenting is one of the toughest things we'll ever do. It requires so much of us. And that is why it's not a journey that we can just let. I believe in continual professional development for me as for me as a counselor, for me as a wife, for me as a mother, for me as a person, that we're continually developing, and we have to be really intentional in how we do that, because you can't take responsibility if you haven't done your own work, because you'll be in blame and you won't be able to forgive yourself. You'll be finding excuses, and while you do that, the relationship remains fractured.
Right.
So it's just so important. Thank you so much. Nina, I wanted to ask again.
Joanna, can I jump back in there for just a
Sure.
second? I want to just say something about that piece about taking responsibility. I really like that, and I really encourage clients to do that. And I always think it's important to help them to think about what they were doing wasn't a bad thing. It was the reason, whatever they were doing, whatever helped them to survive. It helped them to survive. And so that idea of taking responsibility is not as hard to swallow that pill when you think, because of what I did, what I was doing is the reason why I can sit here and have this conversation. So usually it's like defense mechanisms and things like that are coming up. And it's, it's because of those things, is because of, that's why I'm allowed to be here. So sometimes that's helpful with clients or with people when I'm having a conversation to talk about, and it's not a shame or blame. And I think when you can pull that away from it, they are then able to take responsibility. Like, hey, what I was doing the best I could in the moment. And that was okay.
Yeah. Taking responsibility is hard. There are days when I wish I didn't have to, but we have to take it. And I'm just looking at some of the feedback over here on Facebook, and powerful, they're saying, keep developing by doing the work on yourself, yet take responsibility so we can help our children. It's really important. We have to own it and apologize. Yeah. And that's not an easy thing to do, is it? I'm sorry I did this, and not say because of, but I'm just sorry that I wasn't there. I'm sorry that I provided food and shelter, but I wasn't emotionally available. I'm sorry that I never held you when you needed somebody to hold you. I'm just I'm sorry that I didn't do that. And then you can, I think it's really important for us as mothers to share experiences with our children, because I think, you know, age appropriately, because it helps them to understand. It's not excuse, it helps them to understand, and it sometimes prevents them from making the same mistakes that we did, when I can honestly share my experiences with them. So thank you, ladies. Nina, let me get back to you, because this piece on attachment is so important. I think that's the foundation of everything. And when we didn't get that, it kind of sets us up for so much in life. I went to a conference many years ago in Washington, actually, and it was on abuse. And so many of the women that were there that were presenting, who that was their story, said, I was set up for abuse. And I thought, well, what did they mean? They were set up for abuse. Who set them up for abuse? And one of the things that came out was that the lack of connection, the lack of having a secure attachment figure, the lack of having emotional connection, the lack of having a safe, secure base early in life. Not that that is the only thing that causes abuse, but that was for them. And that's what I understood. So let me just ask, how would you help a person who has lived with mother projecting their pain onto them? So mother is angry, mother is sad, mother is in between, mother sometimes have an undiagnosed mental health condition, and project all of that stuff onto them. And now they're adults. How would you help somebody? What would you say to somebody like that?
I think I would start out with the psychoeducation piece of what attachment is. And so really helping them walk through that. And then allowing them to identify their own attachment style. So as an adult now, what is your attachment style? I think when I am able to do that with clients, they are able to then understand from a whole different level of why they do relationship the way they do relationship. And so usually from that example you gave, they are going to have what we call an anxious ambivalent type of attachment. And that's a lot of come here, go away, come here, go away. That's usually how I describe it. And so this idea that I lose sense of self, I lose a connection with self because I'm so focused on the other person in the relationship, because if I take my eyes off of them, if I don't dance right, if I don't twirl right, if I don't flip right, then they're not going to love me. And so once I'm able to kind of lay that foundation with them, then I start working with them on boundaries, because usually that's a big boundary rupture for them. It's like that idea of, I don't know where I begin and where they begin and where I end and where they end. And so it's this big old glob of just relationship that's a mess. I take on their feelings, they take on my feelings. It's just really messy. And so I start to help them kind of pull that apart and have their own sense of self. And then for them to be able to identify what's my stuff and what's the other person's stuff. And once that starts to happen, they begin to define who they are and they become connected more with themselves. So then they can connect better in relationship. Because if I don't know, let's just use an example. If my husband's asking me where you want to go eat, and I'm like, oh, wherever you want to go eat, I'm not connected with self. I'm not even thinking about what I want or what I have a taste for or what I can enjoy in that moment. And so that idea of being able to disconnect from the other person for a moment and connect with self is going to help me then reconnect with the other person in a different way. And so when you're talking about a mom and daughter relationship, it's really starting to identify what's my stuff and what's mom's stuff, and what can I take responsibility for and what do they need to take responsibility for. And having very clear boundaries in that.
Wow. So we were talking about taking responsibility in terms of the mother, but everybody needs to take responsibility. So I can't grow up and say, because I didn't connect emotionally with my mom, then that's why I'm the way I am. I have to take responsibility for my lack of connection and go work on that, heal my bit, connect with self so that I can be fully functional in all of my relationships. I think this last question in this section for us is, how important is it for both to heal, to do their healing journey? How important is that? Can they not do it? Can they put it off? Can they, is it something that is optional?
I would say, unfortunately, no, I don't think it's optional. But what comes up for me when you ask that question is I can't make my mom heal. You know, if me and my mom have a dysfunctional relationship, I can't make her heal. All I can do is take part in myself. And there's this idea of this systemic approach that if I change in the relationship, then that automatically causes the other person to change, whether that's good or bad.
Yeah.
We'll know until we do the work. But I think that idea, when I'm talking to clients, they're like, well, she did this and she did that and she didn't do this and she didn't do that. And I said, but what are we gonna do? What are you gonna do?
Mm.
Do is be responsible for ourselves, and by you getting healthy, it a lot of times will draw the other people in your life to get healthy. When you start setting good boundaries, when you start having healthy connections, then that automatically kind of causes other people around you to either kind of get on board or get off the boat altogether, if you will.
That's right. What do you think, Audra?
Let me come off mute so you can hear me.
Yeah.
I think healing is a choice. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize that. They feel like they're victimized to their childhood and like they don't have a choice. And this is how their experience has made them. And I was one of those people, right? And it took me probably until I was in my early 40s, and I'm giving away my age, but to recognize that I could choose to heal. That in spite of my childhood, in spite of what my mother did do or didn't do, my family went into denial about my mother's mental illness. So although she had 4 sisters and a mother in New York City where I grew up, I was still homeless because they went into utter denial. So I had resentment towards that. And until I chose and I made a decision to let it go, and I made a decision to allow myself to feel the hurt, because I had this tough exterior, you wasn't going to get me. So until I learned to kind of, pull down the walls and create boundaries instead, right? I couldn't make the changes I needed to make in my life, but I had to make a choice first. I had to get tired of pretending. I had to get tired of not showing up authentically. I had to get tired of not having real concrete relationships. And until I got to that point and made the choice, I was stuck. So healing is a choice. And unfortunately, I see so many women just like me stuck because they haven't made the choice. And until they do, life will never, ever be the way they thrive for it to be. I know for children that experience a lot of trauma, we tend to put our hopes in other things, external things.
Yes.
Right? For that acceptance that Nina was talking about. I know for me, it was, I was poor and homeless as a teenager. So as an adult, I'm going to have a great life. So I went to college. I worked really hard. When I got into the workforce, I was that employee that everybody, wanted to emulate. And I looked for acceptance in all those areas. And as hard as I pushed and I tried, as many A's as I've gotten, as many degrees as I've earned, I still never felt like I fit in. And it wasn't until I made a choice to deal with my stuff, until I made a choice to heal, none of those other things really mattered. So I think it's making the choice. Healing is available and we all should strive for that.
Yes.
But unfortunately, a lot of people don't, and they live in this mess. Even though the outside is all pretty, on the inside, it's a mess.
Wow, you're right. We can be overachievers when we experience trauma in our childhood. We go on to do amazing things because it protects us. But what I hear you saying is, both of you, is it's a choice, but we don't have a choice. If you want to,
Bingo.
if you want to live free and have healthy relationships and just be at peace and live a life of purpose, we don't really have a choice. I want to have well-adjusted children. I want to give them a secure place from which to explore the world. And in order to do that, I needed to heal my own trauma so that I can give my children this precious gift to have a secure place from which to explore the world. If you never had that place, yours were not secure, you can still make that choice. You can still choose to heal. If you have children and you're realizing that I really need to do something about this because I can see the patterns repeating in my parenting. Our course, Parenting After Trauma, address those issues and will help you to, it should be in the comment section over on Facebook, so you can access it that way. Okay, now we had somebody who was going to help us with a good relationship with their mom and how that impacted his life. Unfortunately, we have technical issues and we won't have the benefit of his experience today. I'm hoping another day we will have it. I'm looking forward to speaking with him. So Audra, your book, I remember when we spoke, when your book was coming out, Unchain Me Mama, and I really so wanted to be a part of that process. Couldn't at the time, but really follow the journey. And I wanted to just ask you, I'm trying to find my questions for you, Audra. Let me start here, because we've been talking about taking responsibility. Is there any advantages in staying bitter and angry?
You know, it's like what Nina said earlier. She made a great point about not beating yourself up, like the person you were is who you had to be to get through those things. So as a teenager, especially once I lost custody of my son, I became extremely bitter and extremely angry. But I've learned not to begrudge that experience, because it allowed me to go through school. It allowed me to push through. And even when I had my daughter, I went back to work. She was 4 weeks old. It fueled me to do what I needed to do. You know, I don't know if I would have gotten through that period otherwise. So I've learned to embrace that part of the journey. But there comes a point when the bitterness and the anger has to be reconciled for you to truly live the life that you were meant to live. You know, I had to come to terms with, if I continue to be bitter, if I continue to have a chip on my shoulder, I continue to be angry, not only am I allowing all those that rallied against me to win, right? Not only are they winning, my children are losing. My grandchildren are losing.
I like that.
Because I'm giving an example of how not to address things, of how not to deal with life. You know, we can tell our kids what to do all day long. They're going to do what they see.
True.
And I didn't want my daughter's life, I didn't want my grandchildren's life to be what mine was. And the only way for them to have better was for me to show them better. And I couldn't do that being bitter.
No. Wow. The only way they were going to have better is when I show them better. And I couldn't do that being bitter. I love
That's
that.
a tweet. Where's my phone?
It is tweetable. That one is definitely tweetable. I couldn't do it while being bitter. I couldn't show them better while being bitter. I'm going to have to use that one, Audra. I couldn't show them better while being bitter, because I was going to ask Nina, what would you say to somebody who is trapped in bitter and angry? Because so many people are trapped in bitter and angry. What would you say to them?
I mean, it's an old saying of, you know, basically, you know, how's that working for you? You know, more than likely, just getting them to really set with how is that working? And then acknowledging, I think when I was listening to Audra say that, I was like, yeah, because acknowledging that was what you needed in that season. You no longer need that in this season. And so in this season, what do you need? And being able to help them to see that that was helpful then, but it's not helpful now. That was then, this is now, and really separating the two. I think a lot of that work is needed, and trauma work is really helping them separate the two, because a lot of times it becomes one, and I continue to kind of replay some of the old stuff that I did now, and it all just becomes one big mess again. And so really separating that was then, this is now. What do you need now to be successful? The anger and the bitterness is not helping you. It's not helping you get where you want to be.
So how is that working for you? The anger and bitterness is not helping you to get where you want to be. You cannot give them better while being bitter. I just love that one. Please tweet that one for us. Because we just can't, and you can't even give yourself. You can't even give yourself. And one of the speakers on the conference talked about the physical effects of trauma, the physical effects of repressed emotional trauma, some of the diseases that we have, the way stress and anger shuts the system down. And so, you know, we are dealing with physical illnesses all because we're bitter. And I suppose the message today is you don't have to be. You can choose to be better. Healing is a choice, but it's not really a choice. And it's there are people that can help you to walk your journey safely of healing, and you can get on the other side. So Audra, what would moving on look like for someone trapped in anger? What are some of the steps that they could take to move on? Because they can't give better if they're bitter. But what are some of the practicals? I'm a practical person. If you give me something to do, I want you to show me how to do it, and then I'll be able to copy what you do and do it. What are some of the steps that they could take?
Well, I always encourage people first to go to therapy. That I don't know how it is over in the UK, but over here in the US, unfortunately, most people tend to shy away from getting the help they need.
It's the same. It's a worldwide problem then.
Unfortunately. So although I am not a therapist, I rally behind you guys. I appreciate what you do, and I recognize the value you bring. And that was key for me. If I couldn't even be transparent to one person, to my therapist in a closed room, how could I be transparent to the world? So that's where it started for me. So I would encourage anyone, if you're struggling with a mother-daughter issue, don't think you can deal with it alone. I would definitely reach to a mental health professional, because unfortunately society tells us we can talk about daddy issues all day long, right? As women, we can talk about absent fathers, or our father was alcoholic, or our father was unavailable. We can talk about that, and the world wraps their arms around us, right?
Yes.
But for mothers, you better not talk about mommy.
Yes.
Right? You better not say anything wrong about mama.
Yeah.
So for women, especially struggling with issues related to mother-daughter connections, I would highly encourage them to talk with a mental health professional to navigate those emotions, navigate those feelings, and give themselves permission. I don't think we feel it's okay for us to be angry with our mothers when they've done something that's hurt us. We don't feel we have a right to be angry. During my time of, interviewing authors for Unchain Me Mama, so many women wanted to share their story, but were terrified. They wanted to heal, but almost didn't feel like they had a right to say it. Well, it's disrespectful if I admit to the world what my mother's done. So I really think connecting with a mental health professional and sorting through those emotions is the very first step.
Yeah. Awesome. A woman needs her mother too. As
Yes.
you said, it's okay for us to talk about father-son, but nobody talks about mother-daughter or mother-child. There might be some men watching this who are stuck, who needs it too. So you're saying therapy, because it helps you to be authentic. If you can't be authentic in a room with just one person who has a vested interest in your healing, you're not going to be able to do that with anybody else. And you can't do it alone. You can't do it alone.
Because you haven't navigated it, right? If your relationship with your mom is unstable, that's what you've known all your life. So you need that perspective to know that you can heal. The relationship can be healthy, and what that looks like, because for some, healthy is loving them from a distance.
Yes.
Right? And you need to obtain the tools to do that.
Yes. That's the thing. You need the tools to do that. I've had to be a mediator kind of between mother-daughters trying to forge a relationship and negotiate what that relationship will look like moving forward. And I think that was a beautiful thing. I always enjoy that kind of work, because I see two people who can acknowledge that this thing messed up our relationship. This is how it's impacted me. And it's in that safe space where daughter can say, this is, your actions, this is what it did to me. But I'm healing, and I want us to have a relationship moving forward, and we need to negotiate what that will look like. And so that's when you can talk about safe boundaries and things like that moving forward. And I have deep respect for the people who will sit in a room and do that work. It's tough work, but I have deep respect for people who could do that, because you can't do it alone. You might not be able to talk to her alone. It might not be time yet until you've done your work yourself. It might not be time to go talk to her just yet, because she's defended and it might not end well.
Right.
Because when we feel like we are being attacked, what do? We defend. I'm fighting you. You back me in a corner. I don't like this corner because I had my own stuff and you didn't know about my stuff. Did you know that this happened to me? So I mean, and it brings us to this place where, as I said, I've met with mother-daughter trying to work through and do that beautiful work. And it's always a process. My intervention is just part of the process, and it starts it, and you keep going. But how, I want to touch on forgiveness. Does that help at all?
Oh, forgiveness is everything. And it's not always easy to do, but it's necessary because it's not for them, it's for you. Right? In my situation, it was kind of tough because my mother suffering with mental illness, that was something she couldn't control.
Yeah.
And I was always made to feel that I didn't have a right to feel hurt or angry. And so I had to come to terms with the fact that it's okay to be angry. You know, I was a young girl. Why wouldn't I have wanted my mom?
Yeah.
I was abandoned, right? So once I was able to come to terms with it was okay for me to have the feelings that I was experiencing, that opened the door for me to forgive my mom. But I had to first admit I was angry. I had to first verbalize that I was angry. And I had to be okay with that, not allow shame. Oh, I shouldn't feel this way. It's my mother. You know, so once I learned to battle that, it opened the door for me to say, you know what? She did do the best she could. And it opened the door for me to see her and understand her experiences and therefore open the door for forgiveness. But I had to first acknowledge my feelings and why I was feeling the way I was for me to even consider the forgiveness route. But once I did, that weight, oh my gosh. I don't think sometimes we realize all that we're carrying when we're angry and when we choose not to forgive, all that weight, what it does to us. The freedom is in the forgiveness.
Yes. Wow. I love that because there is something about giving up your right to be angry, and people were taking that away from you without helping you to realize that you had the right. You were young. Why wouldn't you want your mom? Why wouldn't I want emotional connection? But when you own that, realize that it was okay, tell your 14-year-old self it was fine to need it, then you could give up the right to be angry and the freedom. Right. How do you find people stuck in forgiveness, Nina?
I do. And I think it's, you know, their fear of not wanting to let go. Because if I let go, then this could happen to me again. And so it's when you were talking about that defense, it's that defense mechanism. It's their armor, if you will, to help them feel like this won't happen to me again. But then I talk a lot about the importance in working with clients on the importance of, you know, you can have other ways of protecting yourself other than anger and unforgiveness. There's other ways of helping you to stay safe and putting those skills in place versus, because this is all they know and this is all that's have ever kept me. If I remember, then it won't happen again. You know, that's kind of they tell themselves that if I hold on to it, I won't allow this to happen again.
And the freedom is in letting go. There's a question that came in that says, how can we do the work? And I wonder if it's the work on forgiveness, the work on letting go, the work on blaming. I'm not sure which work they mean. The work on healing. How can they do it? I know, Audrey, you talked about therapy, which I completely agree with, because it helps you to be authentic. It helps you to have somebody with you who can validate what your experiences and validate your feelings and help you to work through those tough places.
Definitely.
I think that would be a place to start. That would be a place to start.
I agree with that too. I think therapy, I was thinking when Audrey was talking, I was definitely agreeing because I was thinking about that's really the first corrective experience. And you'll hear that term being thrown around sometimes. But corrective experience is basically just that idea that I'm learning to do a healthy relationship with someone else. So a lot of times when I'm in therapy, people's attachment style will come up, and how they do relationship with others is usually how they do relationship with me in therapy. And so it's a great opportunity to work on that and to start to forge this way of doing relationship different. And so that's a really good first step.
And to piggyback off of that, Nina, what I find is the women I work with, a lot of times when their relationship with their mother has been difficult, they tend to have difficult relationships with other women. Because that relationship with our mother, that's our first female interaction. And so if that relationship is rocky, it tends to, you know, transcend into all of our other relationships, especially other women. So when women say, oh, I don't have other female friends, or it's hard for me to connect with women, there's a root to that. And once you deal with that relationship, it will also transcend all to your other relationships.
Yeah.
You know, now I have such stronger relationships with friends. It doesn't have to be on the surface. Years ago, it used to be on the surface. You know, for example, I have a friend that I've known here in Virginia for almost 20 years. And up until recently, and I mean like 2 weeks ago, she didn't even know I had two sisters.
Mm.
Like, how is that? And I'm like, I didn't tell you that. But I was always so guarded,
Yeah.
right? That it was very difficult for me to be transparent. So now that I'm really comfortable in the skin I'm in, child, I don't have to hide anything. It's like, this is me, you know, like it or love it. Hey, you know, it's who I am. And I've learned to be comfortable with that. But it wasn't until I went through the whole process of really dealing with the relationship with my mom that I learned how to be a good friend, how to be a good cousin, how to be a good aunt, how to be, you know, how to be a good woman. It's really connected to that relationship with that mom that it affects every other relationship in your life.
So there's this thing about doing the work for you.
Yes.
All around. Just, it's not, as I said, it's a choice, but it's not a choice, because you're kind of stopping yourself from living so free.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I was growing up, I said my mom and I didn't get along. She stayed alive for us, my mom, and is just an amazing woman in that respect. And, you know, just work hard all her life for her children. And if she could still do it, she probably would still be doing it. But for me, connection happened when last year I told my parents for the first time about the abuse. And my mom and I stayed on the phone and I wrote a blog post about it, and I'm talking about it and I feel like I want to cry. But we stayed on the phone for about over an hour, first time, just connecting. And I thought, gosh, look at that. You know, it took talking about brokenness, because I know we all knew that if we need a defender, my mother would defend us. My mother don't take prisoners, and she don't let you mess about with her children. And she will defend us that way. And so when I was telling her the story, and, you know, they wanted facts and stuff like that. And because I was sharing it publicly now, and I didn't want anybody else to tell them, I wanted to do that. So we connected emotionally for the first time in my 40s. But also I needed to do some work, because if I hadn't done that, there would still be some stuff that I needed to work through. So that's what you kind of hold yourself hostage to when you don't do your own work. So people might be saying, well, I can't afford counseling. I can't afford therapy. I don't know who to find. I don't trust anybody. Where do I go? What would you say to those people, Nina, who that's their reason for not doing anything?
I think there's lots of resources out there. I think your course that you talked about would be one to start with, you know, Parenting After Trauma. So that's going to help you explore some things. There's books out there. There's a particular book that I enjoy, The Whole Parent. It's How to Become a Terrific Parent Even If You Didn't Have One. Okay. And that's by Deborah Wesselman. And so there's lots of resources out there, kind of self-help things to get you started on that journey. There's also people who do sliding fee scale work. And so just asking and being willing to ask, you know, is there a sliding fee scale? Is there something that you can do to help me, because I really want to do this work? And so I think it's lots of different options out there, but those are some of them that come to mind for me.
So the first place is just to go, yeah, that resonates. I need to do something. There's also a book, The Emotionally Absent Mother. It's a really, really good book. That will help shed some light on that as well. So there are self-help resources, there are books. Audra's book, Unchain Me Mama. Can they get that on your website, Audra, or Amazon?
Both. They can go to Amazon, or they can go to unchainmemama.com, or they can go to audraupchurch.com.
Okay, good. So, you know, those things will start you on our course, Parenting After Trauma and The Journey from Broken. We've reduced them both for Mother's Day. And so they're both available at ridiculous price, just because I am invested in helping you to not stay stuck, to not stay on this side of the pain and never experience what freedom feels like. Never experience what emotionally healthy, connected relationships feel like. Never experience what it is to connect to my child, regardless of how old they are, and have a warm, connected relationship with them. Never experience what it feels like to not have shame and fear and making the decision to give up my right to be angry. I did a presentation about 2 years ago when I was talking about giving up your right to be angry. And this woman, thanks for Irene. Irene has posted the link to your website. And this woman who experienced, horrific stuff, just weep through the whole thing because nobody told her she had a right to be angry. And so she didn't know she had a right to give up anger. They told her she shouldn't be, but they never told her she had a right to be. So we understand if you're angry. We understand if you're bitter. We understand if you can't forgive, but what we're saying is don't stay there. Don't live there because it will trap you. So I have two last questions from someone. What do I do? How do I treat my mother when she tries to project unhealthy comments or attitudes from the past onto me? And this is someone who is really trying to forge a relationship with their mom, but she keeps, doing that. What would you say to them, Nina?
I think that comes with that boundary work and being okay. I actually did I do a exercise, and it's kind of, it sounds strange, but it really actually works of like imagining that you have like this protective barrier around you. So when you go into conversation with that person, it's like, I can see you, I can interact with you, but what you're saying doesn't penetrate my heart. And so this idea that I'm protected and that's your stuff and this is my stuff. So having some of that, doing some of that work, I think, and also just reminding them to walk in their most centered self. And so that means just really, when you interact with that person, being connected with self, taking time to respond, not just being reactive, but thinking through what you want, how you want to respond, what you want to say, and really giving yourself that space to be present with what's coming up for you when you're with that person. And the more you can stay grounded and centered with self, the more that's going to help that other person see that maybe what they're saying is not having the effect they want it to have, or maybe what they're saying is not really true, and those kinds of things. And then the other thing is just setting a clear boundary with that person and just saying, when you say these things, this is how it makes me feel. What I would prefer you to do is X, Y, and Z. And really saying what's bothering you, but then also giving them something to do in exchange for what's bothering you. And then if they follow that, then you have to decide whether this relationship is going to continue. As Audrey was saying, sometimes it's better to love people from a distance.
It might be safer to do that. Would you add anything to that, Audra?
I wouldn't, and I totally agree, Nina. We really have to set boundaries. I'm the boundaries queen. I live by boundaries, and I don't apologize for my boundaries. I think it's sometimes difficult for us to enforce the boundaries that we have because most people just kind of live willy-nilly. So when you have boundaries, you're sometimes the odd person out. So just to embrace your boundaries and understand why you have them in place. For me, what was helpful was I took time to understand what makes me happy. I took time to understand what peace looked like for me.
Yeah.
So when I discovered what peace truly looked like and what my happiness truly looked like for me, I became unwilling to allow anyone to take it from me. So boundaries almost became a natural course of action to protect the peace and the happiness that I had finally discovered. So if all you know is chaos, if all you've experienced is negative relationships or unhealthy relationships, right? It becomes difficult to know when to draw the line, when that's what's natural.
Yes.
So I would encourage people to establish where their peace is, establish where their happiness is, right? So when that line is being crossed, it's really clear. I refuse to give up my happiness. I refuse to give up my peace because I know what it feels like and it feels amazing. So my boundaries are pretty solid because of that. I recognize, wait a minute, this is happening. This is disrupting my peace. So I need to make a decision here if I want to retain this peace and happiness that I've worked so hard to obtain.
Yeah. It's too important to not to not do that. And
Yes.
so one final question. So, and Nina, let me start with you. Something has happened in the past, childhood trauma, the traumatized child. So it's kind of like parenting a child who's traumatized. And mom keeps wanting to deny your experience. How do you have a relationship in that space where this is your experience, you've shared it with her, she denies your experience?
And we're talking about an adult.
Yes.
An adult. Okay. I think it's finding people in your life who will validate it, and putting those people in your life, you validating that experience and understanding that for whatever reason, that's her perception, and her perception is her perception. And a lot of times I think we get stuck when people don't validate our feelings because they have a hard time letting go of their perception of the experience, and they want to project their perception onto you. And I think just really telling yourself that that's their perception, and it's painful. I think that's the other piece, is grieving the loss of that validation, because we do want that. I mean, that's the whole thing about attachment, is I can look back at that person, and that person is saying, yeah, great, you know, you're safe, the world is safe, everything is safe. Well, you're giving this idea to this person, and they're saying, no, that's not true, or that didn't happen. That's a painful experience. And so I think first stopping and just grieving the loss of their validation, and then allowing yourself to kind of rise and knowing that, you know, even though that's not their perception, this is my perception, and my perception is true, and it's valid. And I don't need them to, you know, just starting to learn how to figure out of not needing that validation from the other person.
And I imagine that would make a relationship difficult. When my mom, who was supposed to protect me, I felt she didn't, and she's not validating my experience. That must make the relationship difficult. Is there something, Audra, about owning that and just sitting with that discomfort?
Yes, it is. You know, that was really the catalyst behind my daughter writing the foreword to Unchain Me Mama, because you got to see both sides, right? She wrote the foreword to the book, and, you know, was very candid about how she saw me as a mother. And then in the introduction, I wrote how I saw myself as a mother. And, you know, it wasn't spot on. And I wanted to do that purposely, because your story is your story.
Yeah.
But from your mother's view, it could be different from her view. And she has a right to see it her way, and you have a right to see it yours.
Yes.
And I think as women, we have to own that. We have to own our stories, which is why I encourage so many women to write and share their stories in written form, because sometimes until you read a story, you can hear it all day long, because as you're hearing it, your mind is disputing it, right? But when you read it in black and white, it allows a certain level of perspective to happen. You know, as I read my daughter's foreword, I kind of had to say, okay, yeah, maybe that is her experience. And it's what she lived through, and it's okay. Now, as a parent, I may have seen things differently, but it doesn't mean that her experience is negated.
No.
Right? So I just think it's important to understand that your mom may never see things the way you did, right? Because you're looking at things from the perspective of a child, and she's looking at things from the perspective of the mother, who may have had other things happening, and her view may have been obscured, right? So it's really important with understanding who you are, embracing yourself, and allowing yourself to embrace your story, whether anybody else says it's okay, because it's your story.
That's right.
And you have every single right to share it. You have every single right to own it. And you have every single right not to apologize for it. And I think as daughters, we tend to want to apologize. Well, Mom, I'm sorry, but this is how I felt. We don't have to apologize for our experiences. They're our experiences, and we have to own and love our stories.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I mean, for me, the takeaways are: get help. It will help you to be authentic. You can't do it alone. You have a right to be angry. When you've done that work, it will free you to give up the right to be angry. And there's a lot of freedom in that, in forgiveness. And I want to end with, I couldn't give better until I wasn't bitter. I really do love that, because if you have children or just functioning in relationships, as long as you hold on to the bitterness, you won't be able to function effectively. And it stops you from enjoying a full and free life. I'm really wanted to do this just in case, you know, the relationship with your mom still got you stuck. The lack of connection still got you stuck. And you're feeling like, I don't know how to move through this. Sometimes culture keeps us stuck there because we have to respect them. And as you were saying, Audra, you know, or was it you, Nina? Respect means I can't say my story. Respect means, you know, they'll do things to me if I tell my story, and your story is your story, and you have a right to work through it, to heal from it. You have a right to have a loving distance relationship if that's what will keep you healthy. You have a right to heal. Don't deny yourself that. Nina, how can people connect with you as we're ending?
So I am in the process of building my online platform, but for now they can connect with me via email, which is Nina, Nina Keeler, KEELER @gmail.com, or they can follow me on Twitter at LMFT Nina, NINA.
Okay, and I'm sure Irene will post those. And Audra, how can we keep in touch with you?
Sure. You can keep in touch with me on my website, audraupchurch.com. If you'd like to know more about my next anthology, which is called Unchain My Legacy, you can do that as well there. You can schedule an author inquiry call and we can talk about it. Or you can keep in touch with me across all social media outlets at Authentic Audra.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Audra. Thank you so much, Nina. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all those who are watching over on Facebook. Thank you for giving us the space in your Sunday afternoon or your Sunday morning. We really appreciate it. We're going to go now, but I just want to say thank you again for being here. Thanks, ladies.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye, everyone.